Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations number 30. I'm back from the grave, baby. So sorry I missed filming last week, recording last week. One of the things that they don't tell you when you have a small child, nobody tells you this at the hospital, is that you are going to be sick in ways that you haven't been sick since you were a small child. And you will be sick in ways that you have completely forgotten about. This was not necessarily a novel sickness. This was just your run-of-the-mill neurovirus or something like that. But what was fascinating about the course of this illness was that it was a 5-day event. 5-day event of all kinds of gastric distress. And then the best part about it is that you get better after 3 days. And then on the 4th day, you get worse. And then on the 5th day, you're fine. What a roller coaster ride. I'm back. I'm down about 6 pounds. Trained again for the first time on Tuesday night. Felt amazing to be back on the mats. Hopefully not contagious. At that point, I hadn't been symptomatic for like over 24 hours. Trying to be respectful of my training partners in that way in the post-COVID era. But got to get that training in. Got to scratch that itch. Got to stay sharp. Got to get ready for Masters Worlds coming up at the end of August. Yeah. Labor Day weekend. It's going to be a big Labor Day weekend for me. It's also going to be my first trip without a baby since I became a dad almost 2 years ago, and I'm going to Las Vegas with my best friend. So see how that goes. Hopefully I don't die on the mats. Hopefully I don't die off the mats. Any of those things is a distinct possibility. I've actually never been to Las Vegas, believe it or not. For those of you who know me really well, you're like, yeah, I can believe you've never been to Vegas. Doesn't exactly suit your personality type. But yeah, I've never been. Looking forward to going and looking forward to having as much of the Vegas experience as I can have on my middle-class budget. But anyway, should probably get down to the old brass tacks again. Once again, this week's micro essay, is called The Path to Victory. It's BJJ Meditations number 30. The path to victory. Grapplers talk about strategy, systems, mind maps. Is there a singular tactic that works in all scenarios? Is there a mind map or a blueprint that will lead you to victory? Is there a single unexploitable system? That does not mean strategy, systems, and mind maps are useless. They can help us chart the territory of Jiu Jitsu, but they are ultimately low-fidelity abstractions. They do not capture every contour of the game, nor could they. If they did, they would be useless. But we all know that to go into battle without a map is foolish. To be a purely reactive counter-puncher with no initiative of your own is often unproductive at best and dangerous at worst. What is the right way to use these tools? What is the right way to prepare, to train? Your way. As long as you're not traveling or training heedlessly. So yeah, I had a fantastic conversation with Pat, one of the OG BJJ Meditations subscribers. I don't want to call him a fan because he might not even like the podcast. Pat, you didn't tell me if you actually enjoy it. I just know you're out there listening. And honestly, that means a lot more to me than you being a fan. And the conversation we had means a lot more to me than your fandom. But we had this great conversation. He contacted me about his professor asking the brown belts in his school to sort of come up with their routes to black belt, where they see their game developing, where they want to invest their time and effort in order to get the strap. And he wanted to talk to me a bit about his strategy. And we kind of, as these conversations tend to go, things went in a more thematic and amorphous direction. And he brought up this point of routes. His professor always says to him, you should know how to get from point A to point B, regardless of where you are, and where you are being the position, the guard, whatever. You should know where to go. But Pat brought up the very astute point that so often where we want to get to is blocked. It's rare that we're not something that never happens. And we're rolling with somebody who's a totally cooperative opponent or is just completely ignorant, and they're just going to lay there and let you do whatever you want. That doesn't really happen often, if ever, right? So very often where we want to get to is blocked. It's obstructed. So what do? Pat astutely said, you can change the route. You can go around. You can flank. And I think that's the hallmark of a skilled grappler. That's the hallmark of somebody who is a black belt or on their way to a black belt. We're constantly looking to flank, and we can flank in a number of ways. We can move ourselves around, or we can move our opponent. But very seldom is it just going to be a straight shot from point A to point B. So that got me thinking in general, that conversation got me thinking in general about what is the utility of planning? What is the utility of going through this deconstructive act of whether it's developing a system? System is a word that gets thrown around a lot in BJJ marketing. Obviously enter the system. Everybody's heard that phrase, enter the system. And, systems are great. I'm a big proponent of systems thinking. Just for no other reason, it leads to expediency and efficiency in your thinking. You don't have to think through the high resolution map of every granular detail, which is useless because it's overly detailed. Same deal with a mind map. You can see and explore the connections of different positions, different submissions, different guards. Awesome stuff. But what happens when we become overly reliant on these things? I think we have a way of getting locked into them. We miss the fluidity of the moment unfolding. We miss the possibility. And fluidity and possibility, they're very difficult. They're very difficult things to systematize or to mind map. They kind of just, we kind of just need to be present to them. We need to be receptive and attuned to what's going on in real time, and be willing to discard our mind map, be willing to get rid of our blueprint, be willing to abandon our system, or better yet, refine our system with a feedback loop, with reflection in the aftermath. What happened? What did I expect? What's the gap? How can I close that gap for the next time? But this is a lengthy process, and it's a process that requires a lot of focused attention and study, and it's not something that there's really time or space for in a jiu-jitsu class. So either students do this in a self-directed way or they don't. And ultimately, that's one of my goals for BJJ Meditations, is to provide a forum where we can explore these things in a loosely constructed way, but in a way that doesn't just abandon people to figure it out on their own. And I think BJJ Mental Models obviously does a fantastic job with this too. I just think that I'm a bit squishier and softer than Steve is. I tend to go into more of the realm of the esoteric, and I think Steve probably avoids that like the plague. I'd love to talk to him a little bit about that, and maybe he'll get the chance to someday. But anyway, I think that there's a psychological confidence that comes from doing this work of modeling things, right? And I see this often, and I hear this often when I talk to Emily Kwok, my instructor and my coach, about how she prepares for competitions. And she's a big proponent of training at depth thematically. So she's not going to train specific responses to specific techniques. She's going to have specific responses in mind that are deeply rooted in her tactical and technical armory for specific scenarios. So it's very easy for her to say, okay, if this person does this, I have that I can draw from. If they do this, I can draw from that. She builds a lot of psychological confidence and a lot of psychological momentum from the fact that she has so much depth in her game. So she's not, when she's going into a competition, or a role in general, she's not explicitly thinking I must execute X, Y, Z in this robotic fashion. She might have something, generally speaking, that she wants to do. Okay, I want to stay on top. I want to be really heavy with my pressure in this role. But in terms of why and how that objective is achieved, that's very much left to the present moment. She lets circumstances steer and navigate things. So she strikes a good balance, I think, between proactivity and reactivity. She's very, very proactive, but at the same time, she's receptive to what's happening in the role. And I think that I tend to be that way too. Obviously not the big difference between me and Emily is that Emily has a ton of experience and accolades to draw from and accomplishments to draw from to build that psychological confidence. That's still very much a work in progress for me. But I do like to know that I know my game at depth, and to strive to be receptive to what's happening, and to just know that whatever happens, I have resources I can draw from to respond accordingly. And when I roll well, like my second match, my last comp, that's what I'm doing. When I roll badly in my, like I did my first match, my last comp, that's what I'm missing the mark on. So that, in my mind, is the utility of planning. It gives us this depth we can draw from to give us psychological resilience when the chips are down. But planning is not a replacement for doing. And this is something that I see in a lot of grapplers. These are the people who you might know who collect instructionals, who spend a lot of time reviewing footage, who have an opinion about every single pro or semi-pro match, who always seem to be up on the latest BJJ gossip. I think that all of these things shift us from the propositional, or from the real into the realm of the propositional or the theoretical. And hey, you know, postmodernism, I think, has given us enough propositional and enough theoretical. You know, I sat in undergraduate education for 4 years, doing that, thinking a whole lot, but not really doing much of anything, theorizing a whole lot, but not actually making anything. You know, being a philosophologer, but not really being much of a philosopher. So, you know, I'm done with that. And my embracing of Jiu Jitsu is a big part of that transition, where like I'm jettisoning that. And I think that a lot of the feelings of malaise and meaninglessness and nihilism that we're coping with right now as a culture, as a society, stem from that. And Jiu-Jitsu is just one practice, one way to kind of kick all that stuff in the nads and move on. So footage is great, tactics are great, planning is great, but ultimately we need to make these things real. We need to step out onto the mats, put it together, and make it happen. So how do we do that? Well, I think I've observed some patterns in how that's done. One of them is what I like to think of as the counterpuncher. In my mind, the counterpuncher kind of has this laziness to them. They don't plan at all. They're just going to go out there and go with whatever happens. I see this in some instructors too. The counterpuncher instructors, they don't really put together a plan for a class. They just know, like, oh, it's mount this month, so I'll show something to teach, you know, regarding mount, and that'll be good enough. There's certainly not enough intellectual rigor there, I think, for there to be any juice. And also, I think that there's, along with that mental laziness, there's a checking out that comes along with it. It's as if they're saying, like, oh, it doesn't really matter. You know, it doesn't really matter the outcome, so I'm not going to prepare accordingly. But, like, of course it matters. There's a ton at stake here, and it's a lot more than a medal. It's a lot more than training well in class. It's a lot more than getting the maximum possible out of the lesson. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. So the other tendency I see is people who kind of discard form altogether. You know, maybe where the counterpuncher kind of sees the value in form, they're kind of just like, I'm not going to enforce my will whatsoever. The person who completely discards form is kind of like the petulant undergrad who just doesn't see the value in learning the grammar. They're just going to go out and be the next great American novelist. But it doesn't work like that either. You know, there really is a necessity to thinking about these things deliberately, to thinking about structure, to considering how we put the pieces of our game together. So that doesn't really work. So what does work? I think it's kind of this middle way. I think it's studying the grammar. It's studying the technique. It's practicing the cross collar choke until you feel like you're going to fall asleep on the mat out of boredom. You do that. You establish this baseline level of technical knowledge. And then once you have a sound foundation, you can begin to understand how you as a person relate to that technical knowledge. You can begin constructing something like a game. And once you have something like a game in place, something that's like a true north relative to who you are, what you value, what you enjoy doing on the mats, that's really when the magic happens. That's when I think, as Pat said, you can start to go around. You can find alternate routes. You can flank. It's not necessarily following the line from point A to point B. It's truly where the jiu-jitsu happens. It's improvisation. It's jazz. That's what it's all about in my mind. But, I want to focus a bit on the last line of this essay before I bring it on home here. This idea that the right way is your way as long as you're not traveling heedlessly. I see this pattern time and time again, especially among blue belts and white belts, where it's like they're skipping English 101 and instead trying to write the great American novel. I like to think there's a story about Hunter S. Thompson when he was learning how to write as a kid, teenager, where he would just type The Great Gatsby. He would sit down on his typewriter and write The Great Gatsby just to kind of hear and feel the music of F. Scott Fitzgerald's prose. And that really stuck with me, both as a writer and now as a martial artist. You're not creating your own novel. You're not writing your own music right away, but there's a ton of utility to feeling it, to experiencing it, to seeing what other artists have done, what other creatives have ddone, other martial artists have done. I had another thought there, but I lost it. I think I made my point anyway. But yeah, there's this tendency among certain students, particularly at the beginning stages, where they're like, why do I need instruction? Why do I need the basics? Why do I need these drills? Like, I can just go on YouTube and learn all this myself. And yeah, you can, but you're missing the connecting pieces. You're missing the artistry. And I think that ultimately our role as instructors in the post-instructional, post-YouTube world is to be almost like a curatorial service. We're shaping the experience for our students. Yeah, they might go out and learn X, Y, and Z online, but ultimately it falls to us to teach them how to put X, Y, and Z into something like a game. And ultimately it falls to us to show them how to create a game that is aligned with their true north. And I keep saying aligned with their true north. You're probably like, what the hell does that mean? So my true north, one of my chief values in jiu-jitsu and in life as a writer is precision. I was trained as a journalist, so facts matter to me, and accuracy in my jiu-jitsu matters to me too. And when I discover sloppiness in my game, it's I have this like kind of revulsion to it. It's a really strong, visceral sort of like, and that's kind of my true north. Like, let's be precise here. There are things that I say again and again when I'm teaching, like, okay, if you're taking away space, don't give it back. Like, let's be precise with the way we're managing our space. Let's not be sloppy there. Constantly just rooting this stuff out, looking for ways of striking it from our game is kind of how I get by. So how do we help other people figure that out as instructors? I think the sooner we can help them figure that out, the better it is for everybody. And ultimately, students learn how to find their own way. They learn how to build their own game, and they have more beautiful jiu-jitsu, and that's what it's all about. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up for this week. Guess what do I need to say? The usual stuff, just looking over my notes here. BJJ Meditations, if you want to support BJJ Meditations, go to Mirror. You can buy an NFT of one of the essays. They're about $15 a piece. Great way to send some cash my way. Again, no need to do that if you're strapped. This is always going to be a free resource. At some point, we might do some more like premium type content or events or stuff like that. But the podcast itself, these episodes, they will always be free. And that is hopefully of service to you. That's really what this is all about for me. And if you really want to support the podcast other than going to Mirror, some of the best things you can do are like, subscribe, review, and share it. Wherever you listen, wherever you watch, just give it a like, leave a comment. Would love to hear from you all. I think it's bjjmeditations@gmail.com or something like that. I'll put the link in the show notes. Pat reached out to me via email. We had a great conversation. Would love to talk to you. Would love to train with some of you in person. If you're ever in Princeton, New Jersey, come to Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I teach on, it's going to be Thursday nights now, Saturday. I think those are the only 2 days I'm teaching. Saturday morning. Emily teaches on Tuesday night. Shane McCarthy teaches many other nights. He's our head coach. He's awesome. Really can't go wrong training with any of these people. But I would love to meet you, talk to you, see what you're getting out of this, and just learn more about you. Best way to keep up with all things BJJ Meditations is to follow on Instagram. That's BJJ_meditations. And of course, if you're interested in working with me, a lot of this stuff that I come up with on the podcast is not things that are not things I'm just pulling out of my ass. These are things that I work with on a day-to-day basis with some pretty high caliber people in the peak performance space and my consulting work with Emily and Josh Wadeskin. So if you're looking to figure out potentially how you could use this martial art to improve your career or improve your life writ large from a first principles perspective, I can help you with that. Hit me up either on Instagram or on email. And of course, you can read more of my writing on Substack if you'd like, also for free. And that's a great way to support me too. But yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I will talk to you next week, barring any more infectious disease.